I love Georgia, but some Georgians trouble me, and I want to talk to you about that today. This is your political animal, March the 24th, 2010. As a Yankee from Buffalo, New York, who moved to Georgia on December the 14th, 1976, I came to this state fresh off the heels of my United States Air Force basic training and technical school. I can still remember landing at the Macon Municipal Airport and experiencing the unusual smell of a certain paper mill, an odor which would help define my stay in Middle Georgia for the next 17 years. Since arriving in Georgia nearly 33 years ago, I have since married a native Georgian and have become somewhat acquainted with both the demographics as well as the politics, both past and present, of the Peach State. And while I can unequivocally state that I love the state of Georgia to the extent that it is nearly always on my mind, there are certain Georgians whose actions and words deeply trouble me. I could go through the list of Georgians who reigned supreme in the heyday of de jure, or by law, segregation. Individuals like Lester Maddox, Richard B. Russell, Tom Watson, Eugene Talmadge, and former University of Georgia President O.C. Adderhold, who allegedly lied under oath when asked whether the university that he was at the time leading had in any way forcefully prohibited African Americans from attending. These names readily come to mind. But there is one individual who is threatening to outdo them all as the biggest bigot, or one of the biggest bigots, that the state of Georgia has ever produced. His name is, drum roll here, Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, and a man who has no compunction about railing against any progressive policies that the Obama administration seeks to implement. And while this may be summed up as good adversarial politics to many, or by many, his most recent comments are threatening to cement his reputation as a hate monger in the mode of a Bull Connor, a Jim Clark, a Richard B. Russell, a Tom Watson, or one of the other many segregationist reactionary politicians who played on the fears of people rather than encouraging their hopes. If you'll notice, I didn't mention the name of former Alabama Governor George Wallace, whose defiantly infamous segregation now, segregation forever statement at the schoolhouse door of the University of Alabama made him the poster child of reactionary politicians. I intentionally failed to mention him because I believe that he managed, whether because of a potential assassin's bullet, which left him paralyzed and wheelchair bound for the remainder of his life, or whether purely out of a pricked conscience, only eternity knows, to live his final days and eventually die on the right side of history. Although he is one of the most well-known of the civil rights era segregationists, he must be given the benefit of the doubt that he eventually listened to the better angels of his nature. We can only hope and pray that Mr. Gingrich will do the same, and that hopefully it won't require a personal tragedy to bring him to that point. To be sure, Mr. Gingrich has endeared himself to both the right wing of the Republican Party and possibly some conservative Democrats, as well as the Tea Party, to the point that some see him as a viable 2012 presidential candidate. A regular commentator on the Fox television network, as well as radio shows such as Sean Hannity, the former House Speaker enjoys unlimited access to a wealth of media outlets with which he is able to pontificate about the glories of social conservatism, while at the same time denouncing the evils of progressivism. Again, to a certain extent, we would love to be able to celebrate his right of political expression, but it becomes very difficult to do so when he makes statements such as the following. If Democrats pass health care reform, quote, they will have destroyed their party much as Lyndon Johnson shattered the Democratic Party for 40 years by passing civil rights legislation, end of quote. So, according to the former House Speaker, passing landmark civil rights legislation in the 1960s was a mistake. So that means that if we follow his logic trail, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which among other things guaranteed the equality of treatment on the basis of sex and race, was a colossal mistake. Also, according to this Republican sage, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which among other things aimed to overcome legal barriers at the state and local levels that prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote under the 15th Amendment of 1870, 15th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, and significantly widened the franchise and is considered among the most far-reaching pieces of civil rights legislation in U.S. history. According to Mr. Gingrich, if we follow his logic trail, this was also an affront to the U.S. Constitution. That would mean that Congressman John Lewis, whose head was split open as he and others attempted to march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge from Selma to Montgomery on Bloody Sunday, March the 7th, 1965, was mistaken to attempt such a stride toward freedom. This would also mean that poll taxes and literacy tests. Now we have to ask, does Mr. Gingrich have former Colorado Representative Tom Tancredo's cell phone number? Because Mr. Tancredo, just a few weeks ago at the Tea Party convention, suggested that literacy tests, if not poll taxes, be once again implemented so that people, in order for people to have the right to vote. And to add insult to injury, it would also mean that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. went to Memphis, Tennessee in support of sanitation workers and eventually died in vain. Mr. Gingrich, if you really hope to be taken seriously as a political pundit by others besides those on the right-wing fringe, or to even one day sit in the Oval Office where President Obama now sits, if you hope to one day sit there as more than an invited guest, you really need to examine whether or not you will have the capacity to represent all Americans and not just those who hold your extreme right-wing views. That's my opinion. What's yours? This is your political animal, March the 24th, 2010. I hope to hear from you. Go to www.shermancrockett.com to read my blog articles and also to comment on them. You can also listen to my video clips on YouTube by going to www.youtube.com/Big Sherm, SHERM, Big Sherm 7. You can also follow me, or I can follow you on Twitter. www.twitter.com/Obama Our Prez, Prez as in zebra. Twitter.com/Obama Our Prez, Prez. God bless you and have a good day. Tell Mr. Gingrich I said hello.